Hello, our favorite humans. Welcome to Bronx Tales with your host, Bronxy B, and me. I'm Logan. Thank you for being here. In this episode, first, I have a few questions on some things, and I'd like to call this collective intelligence because although sometimes we make videos giving information, there are times where I would like your guys' input on maybe some questions that I might have. So in this video, we're going to call this collective intelligence. And if you guys would ever so kindly, if you have the answers to any of my questions in this video, please comment them below, as I would love to read your insight and the answers that you guys may have found. But aside from that, we also do have information we want to speak about. Specifically, we've been speaking a lot about Dylan Mortenson's interview and her statements, the things she's been saying, the inconsistencies from one report to the next on the same interview from police station to police station. But aside from that, I wanted to speak on another statement that Dylan made regarding the crime in one of her interviews. Now, she made it a point to say, "We did a really big deep clean the weekend previous to the crime, so it might be really difficult for you guys to find any evidence on the perpetrator." In which the officer came back and said, basically, well, it would kind of be the opposite. If you guys cleaned before the crime, that would mean a lot of the prints or DNA or anything left behind would make it easier to find from the perpetrator if you guys had cleaned previously to this. In which it was interesting that it noted Dylan let out a sigh when the officer responded with that. And then she added, "Well, I hope they do find evidence on the perpetrator." I just found it interesting, and I thought that in the moment that probably shouldn't have been something she was thinking about. But it seemed to me more like a failed attempt at a cover-up of possibly what was her cleanup after the crime. However, she had it completely backwards. I also wanted to make note that at the end of Dylan's interview, it specifically states that they turned off the cameras, they turned off the audio, and they talked to Dylan without anything recorded, completely off the record. And it was noted that they did this, which I find very interesting. I'd love to know or be a fly on the wall in that type of an interview where nothing is being recorded and it's all off the record. It doesn't state that in anybody else's interview, only hers, that they turned off the audio, they turned off the recording, and they let her speak freely at no harm to her. The question I have for you guys, I actually mentioned in yesterday's live, but I wanted to come back and ask it again as I woke up in the middle of my sleep the other night with this idea. And I ran and I wrote it down really fast, half asleep, and I thought, when I wake up and reread that, that's either going to be the stupidest idea ever, or I might have something here that should be talked about maybe a little bit more. Or asked to you guys, as I don't have the answer to this. It's actually just a question. So I woke up and I apparently wrote down that, do you guys think maybe there was something attached to Bryan Kohberger's car? And when I say that, I mean maybe attached to his license plates. When an officer gets behind him and runs his plates, is there something that gives them a pop-up or an instruction to make contact with the individual driving that car? Because I find it very, very strange how many times Bryan Kohberger was pulled over in the very, very short amount of months that he lived there. He had been pulled over 4 times in the 6 months that he had lived there. But to me, that sounds like an awfully lot amount of times, as I honestly can't remember, knock on wood, the last time I've been pulled over. It sure has never been 4 times within a 6-month period, especially knowing he was completely legit. He had his insurance, his registration, and everything needed to drive a car legally. So why was he being pulled over so many times? We know of 2 times prior to the crime. We also know that Bryan Kohberger's car was the first and only car that was found after the bolo was put out looking for that year, make, and model of car. I find it strange that his car was the first and only car ever found after the bolo and reported on. Technically, they reported on it before the bolo, but I digress on that. And then we have two more times Bryan Kohberger being pulled over literally in the same day on the way back to Pennsylvania, in which those officers stated, no, I wasn't given any direction to pull him over from any other department, knowing that they were looking at him for this crime. Those officers seemingly pulled him over just as doing their job. But was it just doing their job? Or did something come up on Bryan Kohberger's license plates that told officers to make contact with the individual if they got behind him? And that's a question I have for you guys. Does that make any sense? Or am I just going crazy over here trying to find any lead possible as to why he would be pulled over so often, an abnormal amount of times? Another question I have for you guys is, does anybody know if it is a 100% fact that Bryan Kohberger took a picture on his phone when his phone was reported to be shut off by him? Now, I've heard this in passing. I've heard this speculatively, but I haven't found anywhere where that is listed as fact, only as speculation. So I'm just here to ask you guys if anybody knows if that is a fact, that Bryan Kohberger did take a picture on his phone when it was apparently shut off, which we know would be impossible. And that's why I ask. And another question I have for you guys is, we've all been told that Jack Showalter went to his parents' cabin on Sunday, the 13th, skipped school for a week to be out there, and then the next following week was Thanksgiving break. Now, in these reports, it states that Jack Showalter did not go to Boise until the 14th, in which he didn't go to his parents' cabin. He went to his parents' regular house in Boise. And I'm just wondering, at what point did that change? Because I always thought that that was actually a fact, and now I'm learning that might not be. Do you guys have any input on whether that is a fact or not? Because I'm pretty sure I didn't just pull that out of thin air. I thought it was known that Jack Showalter went to his parents' cabin the very next day, and in these reports, it doesn't say that at all. In fact, it says he went to his parents' house on Monday. So if anybody knows the answers to these questions, please comment them below. I would be very much obliged to read your comments. I love all of your guys' comments. They're always amazing. So that's why I'm asking for your input on these subjects. One more thing I want to run past you guys is there's a report that states on the folding game table that we see in the living room kitchen area in front of Dylan's door that wasn't moved at all. But there's several reports that state that there was blood smears in several places all over this table. And I'm going to post the picture because I cannot find any blood smears on this table in this picture whatsoever. I couldn't imagine they'd be under the table. I would think the way that it was listed was there's smears on the table. I'm thinking the top of the table. I just can't happen to find any. So I'm really confused. Do you guys see anything that could possibly be red fluid on this table? I'm sure that we've all seen Dylan's victim impact statement or audition at the sentencing, in which she gets very choked up. However, naturally, that only happens when you're crying, and I didn't see one tear fall whatsoever. And this is not victim shaming or blaming or anything. It is just my observation. I did not see one actual tear at all come from her face. And she said so many things about being so close to her friends and living to make them proud and all sorts of stuff. And I guess my statement to that is kind of a statement, kind of a question. I wonder if she feels bad that the last thing she said to her roommates was, yelling at them to shut up or be quiet because they were laughing and dancing and having fun, according to her. According to Dylan, that's what she thought was going on. And she yelled upstairs for them to be quiet or shut up. And technically, that'd be the last thing she said to them. So I'm just wondering how she feels knowing that that was the last thing she said to them rather than something kind or nice, because she seems to want to make everybody believe that she was so close to them. And from my understanding, they only lived together for 3 months. I don't know if they knew each other before that or not, but they were only roommates for 3 months. And a lot of the things that I see, it comes across as that Dylan didn't necessarily really even maybe like them. And that is just my opinion, but that's kind of what I gather from all the information that I have. So to know the last thing she said to her roommates was to shut up or be quiet, I'm just wondering if that affects her at all. So hopefully that $105,000 will maybe help her get through that aspect as well. When reading the reports, the new ISP reports, I noticed that each male they interviewed, at the bottom of the report, it states this person didn't have any injuries to their hands, arms, face, or neck. And that seemingly, I guess, what cleared them from being looked into any further. However, neither did Brian Koberger. So why is it okay for one, but not for the other? I need to make a custom emoji for you guys that says, you can't have it both ways. Seems like in this case, that's a running theme. In last night's live, we also went over Showalter's interview. Several things to keep in mind in that interview, but the one I find the strangest is the fact that he said in the middle of the day, he would feel jumpy walking out of his apartment the morning of the crime. And I'm just wondering why he would feel jumpy when all he knew in that moment was that somebody at 1122 King Road was unconscious. Why would that make you feel jumpy to come outside of your own apartment if somebody was only unconscious because he hadn't found out yet that anybody was unalived? What would make you so jumpy, Showalter? Allegedly. Now, I've heard in passing that the medical examiner or coroner cannot tell us in what order the victims were unalived. And I find that very strange because I feel like all you'd have to do is look at the transfer of red fluid from victim to victim. And I'm wondering if either that wasn't done or was that not possible? And the reason it would be not possible would be if a separate weapon was used. I'm wondering if it's true that it was stated they cannot tell us the order of unalivings, or if they are just not willing to tell us the order of unalivings. I find that very interesting, and I really want to know the order because I think that tells a story within itself, and it's very crucial, important information to this case. But if they cannot tell us the order, then the only reason would be because separate weapons were used on different victims. I'm sure we've all heard recently that mainstream media has been saying that the perpetrator said Kaylee's name in particular when she was apparently in the second floor bathroom crying. Somebody has stated that the perpetrator walked in or stood there with Kaylee and said, "It's okay, Kaylee, I'm going to help you." And that is absolutely not true. Kaylee was not the one in the second floor bathroom. If anybody, it would have been Xana in the second floor bathroom crying, which I don't even think that was true. I would assume she would be in her bedroom crying, as we haven't seen any evidence of any red fluid in the second floor bathroom at all. However, it just doesn't even make sense. Why would somebody call Xana by Kaylee's name? The perpetrator, in my opinion, did not say Kaylee's name whatsoever. I don't know why mainstream media is pushing the Kaylee for every single discussion on this case. The focus for them has always been on Kaylee, and I'm not understanding why. Perpetrator did not say Kaylee's name at all. That doesn't even make sense. And speaking of which, of whose room is whose and who would be in what bathroom, I just want to make sure that people do know Kaylee actually used to live in Xana's room. And she hadn't, but just recently, I would say within the past few months prior to this crime, moved upstairs. Before that, Kaylee had always lived in Xana's room. And that was noted in a report by one of their friends. Kaylee used to have Xana's room, ended up moving upstairs to the 3rd floor, and then Xana moved in to the 2nd floor. I also want to make sure people know that, and I don't know if this has any bearing on the case whatsoever, I personally just found this a little weird, that one of their friends received a video that Bethany took in her room, and it was a video of Dylan snoring. In the report, it specifically states this person got this video from Bethany of Dylan snoring that morning, and she was trying to listen in the background of the video to see if she could hear anything, but she could not. So apparently at some point, Dylan did fall asleep. It couldn't have been for very long because we see her phone activity, but that also means that Bethany wasn't asleep either. Bethany was taking videos in the morning of Dylan sleeping in her bed and snoring and sending it to her friends. So for either of them to say they were sleeping the entire time is an absolute lie. And one of the friends has proof of it because Bethany sent her a video. After all of this happening, not only did Dylan fall asleep for 45 minutes, but Bethany's taking videos of her. Meanwhile, we're told this entire time that they're doing this, all the doors in the house are open. It's 28 degrees outside. Murphy's been barking. You saw somebody in your house with a, like, it's just wild, the actions that they took or didn't take. And then hearing Dylan try and cover up a possible cleanup that they did is interesting. I do think that Dylan mentioned the fact that they cleaned up the weekend before and did a deep clean because she thinks that's going to help cover up the fact that they cleaned after the crime took place. That's what we have for you today. I would love to see if anybody has any answers to the questions. If you could please comment them below so I can appreciate all your guys' insight on these topics. Other than that, that's what we have. Do something nice for yourself today. Be kind, but more importantly, be kind to your dog. Bye, guys.